Hey there, School of Tomorrowites. Let me just introduce myself and this channel to those just joining us. We're kind of in the middle of a fall term of a course in 2020 that I called Heuristics for Teachers, and it's a very mathy course, but it's also mathy meaning it's got a fair amount of computation going on. But we're also very interested in just what I'll call geospatial data or geographic information systems, GIS, GPS, all that kind of stuff. And what this is about is great rivers and literature and philosophy extending themes of American transcendentalism, Quakerism, and the Bucky Fuller corpus, Buckminster Fuller being, in this channel's view, a latter-day American transcendentalist. His great aunt, Margaret Fuller, was editor of the Dial magazine and, well known in transcendentalist circles. But it's not just who his relatives were. We can all find someone in our family tree to demonstrate this or that, but the content of his writing itself, what it's about. Now, here's how I'm going to link it together. What's on the screen here is more from Alan Potkin, and he's studying the lower Salween, which is a river that is mostly in Burma where he's looking at it, but there's plans in Thailand perhaps to do an interbasin transfer that could impact the subcultures all downstream from there, obviously, and upstream behind it. In other words, giant water management projects relating to hydropower, relating to irrigation. This is the kind of thing that ecologists and planners, really, this is world game. Alan is playing world game. He's been to these places too. And so we're flying along using like a Google Earth utility, but in other parts of this video, we actually drop down and visit these very same places because Alan intrepidly goes there. Alan was, I was Alan's best man in Thimphu in Bhutan where he got married, right? Actually in the family household at the time. My parents were based in Bhutan for some years. My dad worked there in the Ministry of Education, starting out there with World Bank, I think, but Helvetas, the Swiss, picked up his salary, and he helped the spread of schools, their siting, and not the architecture of the individual schools, but where to put them kind of thing. And Mom taught in the she taught in the Bhutanese public school system. It was influenced by Father Mackey, so it's not inappropriate to mention Catholic there, but you may have seen my own Bhutanese mathematics curriculum segments here. Now, Alan went to Vietnam during the war and discovered his Jewish identity there, and he's been a character in these videos going back, as has Vietnam, because I've been weaving together a story, which is what I'm still doing. Linking in the things that I link in, like Quakers. Now, Sam Hill here. Change rivers. Change to the Columbia River, Columbia Gorge, which drains into the Pacific Ocean. It comes from way up in Canada. It has a Snake River tributary feeding into it from out in eastern Oregon. And Sam Hill, he's born in Minnesota in a Quaker family that has escaped to the Midwest. So if you were abolitionist or even just discovered to harbor abolitionist feelings, or you were in some way abolitionist before the Civil War, you were more or less a persona non grata in some communities. You were considered like a terrorist because it was legal to have slaves. In those days, the government had not illegalized slavery, right? And there's still some kingdoms and emirates and places where slavery is accepted. It's not like we live in a world free of slavery even today. But the democratic ideals made it really, really hard. The idealism embedded in the Constitution and just the momentum established by those who had created this new government was such that maintaining class and race distinctions, that was being crushed in a way. And it's interesting how nobility in Europe, old Europe, let's call it, thinking of Rumsfeld when I say that, old Europe was kind of into it. It's like they imagined into existence some of what democracy had to mean. And I'm thinking of Queen of Romania here, Queen Marie. Is it Marie? Anyway, she's not really, she's the granddaughter of Queen Victoria, and she's very much part of the royal family of Britain, but she's been married off to the king of Romania, right? And when she turned down some other guy. And so she's also a socialite, or I don't want to say anything too, I'm looking up to her here, but she's bridging between royalty and sort of Hollywood celebrity. And the only reason she came to the U.S., okay, on a train trip in 1926, and the railroads were seeing this as a publicity opportunity, and the donated cars, like 10 royal outfitted coaches. So she could go across the country, and it was a media event everywhere. But why was she going across the country? What was she doing? She was headed to this really desolate part of Oregon along the Columbia Gorge. I mean, beautiful. By desolate, I just mean it was so not developed at that time. And Sam Hill, of Quaker extraction, whose family had fled, as I was saying, to Minnesota from east. When it was found out that they were Quakers with abolitionist sentiments, his family moved to Minnesota. And he grew up in this Quaker family that had escaped, into the Midwest. And this is a large pattern in American history. Quakers moving west, especially to the Midwest, like to Indiana. Think Richmond, Indiana. Think Earlham College. They're trying to get away from, you could call it persecution in places where slavery is okay, but they don't think it's okay for themselves. But they're also abolitionists, and it just makes them subversives. You've got to understand how a lot of Americans have been treated as subversive for their beliefs, right? And if being anti-slavery used to be one of those subversive beliefs. So what I'm doing with Sam Hill is elevating his Quaker status because I think he's also an Emersonian, and that the Queen of Romania would come all the way out to Maryhill with a train full of Romanian goodies for this museum, because by then it had already been decided it was a museum. It was going to be. Loie Fuller, not related to Buckminster, is pioneering this new kind of dance where she's like got all the silks and stuff, and she's able to astound people in Paris and around Europe, and she becomes really good friends with the Queen of Romania. She's on the train with her in this trip, and she's good friends with Sam Hill, and they're like planning how we're going to make this art museum in the middle of nowhere out in the Columbia Gorge. And she's going all over Europe and making friends and getting all kinds of artwork committed and dedicated. And it's a great thing in a way because they want to help America develop high culture, really. They all want to have a stake in this new world and make it a great thing. And Queen Mary came over here, Queen Marie, looking forward to just being because America is going to be this great grand democracy, she's just going to be an equal among co-equals. Maybe better dressed and stuff, but she's going to eat corn on the cob and pumpkin pie. She's going to do all the ethnic things like she does in Romania. She does all the ethnic Romanian stuff. She wears Romanian dress. So she's She's liked by the Romanians, but she wants to come to America and experience democracy. So I'm thinking Sam Hill is a great citizen diplomat, and the Quakers don't really embrace him for all his attempt to establish a Quaker colony there at Maryhill. It didn't pan out. It's very difficult to farm in that time there. Still would be. Still, there is actually a farming community there now. Right down below Stonehenge, I'm talking, right? But anyway, the museum is part of a big ranch, and the wind power and the grazing that goes on is enough to power the museum, you could say. But then there's people go there and stuff, and Maryhill is a success. In other words, this crazy idea that these women and Sam Hill had, the Queen of Romania and Loie Fuller, their crazy idea to help this Quaker guy in the middle of nowhere develop a cultural center along the Columbia Gorge in the guise of Maryhill Museum, an unlikely scheme, it would seem, worked out beautifully, and that museum is right there along the gorge. I highly encourage anyone to visit that. So that's Sam Hill and Quakers and citizen diplomacy. Going forward, you can see his concern with public roads and my interest in Truckers for Peace, the World Truck Driver and Truck Crew Exchange Program. All of this kind of comes together. Because, and the last thing I'll say, Unitarianism. Remember, Emerson quits the Unitarian Church and founds, you could say, American Transcendentalism, more a philosophy than a religion. Some would argue, most would. But it's coming from Unitarianism, and remember what that was about. Unitarianism, as opposed to what? Well, as opposed to Trinitarianism. And so instead of Father, Son, Holy Ghost with Jesus kind of co-equal as a divinity, now we were changing the emphasis, and Jesus could be more of a normal person with God within, like we all have. In other words, Jesus becomes a metaphor for every man, and therefore all the greater his teaching, because he did it not with an unfair advantage of being a God. I mean, okay, you can perform miracles as a God, but he's a human being, is kind of the feeling we're getting, and this is consistent with the democracy and the equality, and that humans are not ranked in some kind of closer to God, further from God's by birth. The whole idea of nobility versus the working man or whatever. This is all, and slaves versus, pharaohs. This is all being challenged by the grand dream of democracy, but the equality implicit there that the Quakers were also really into, right? So the idea of being friends of Jesus, the way the Quakers think, based in Scripture, that Jesus wanted friends, it's easier to think that way when you've got a Unitarian background or backdrop, I would think. In other words, yeah, we're already not thinking of Jesus as sort of part of a Trinity. We've got this Unitarian thing going, and Jesus can be related to as a friend. It's within the realm of possibility. Sounds like total blasphemy and heresy, but that's what we're talking about, the Protestant Reformation and all the schisms, and Christianity is kind of at war with itself in many ways. But it's, these are simmering kind of cold wars. We try to keep them that way. I'm not really, a missionary. I'm not trying to make people turn into Quakers or anything. I just want to hold up the Quaker banner at the Maryhill Museum. I think, the Quaker side can play it up as much as they want. Make Sam Hill be a great Quaker is what I'm saying. And yeah, he had this, he talked like people talk. He's a businessman, And he was, the Soviets were a big threat to him, and he was anti-German when it was fashionable to, like World War I. You weren't going to go around expressing a lot of pro-German sentiments there and make headway in business. So I'm not saying that his walk and his talk was some kind of Gandhi, Martin Luther King thing. He tried to work with the Native Americans as co-equals, like he worked at it, right? But I'm not saying he was like a great civil rights activist. I'm not trying to cast him in that sense, but I think as an egalitarian and a bridge between the idea of high royalty, Queen of Romania, for example, and just an ordinary self-made man, and that the two could sort of be equals in a role-playing sense. Like the way you feel equal is under this role. The role itself is just theater, and then under that, we're all equals, like that sensibility. That was something the royals of Europe were playing with and helping to imagine into existence. And it turned into like celebrity, right? Like Hollywood. In fact, the Queen, as I was saying earlier, she was hoping to go to Hollywood, maybe get in the movies, maybe have something she'd written made into a movie, maybe be made into a movie star. Who knows? That inclination was there. But the trains in that part of the world were not willing to offer free coach service. They weren't going to just do the publicity thing and like pay her way to go to Hollywood. So they couldn't really work that in. It was too expensive, basically. But you can see where it's going, right? Royalty turning into celebrity as we kind of lose the old compass of who's a divinity among us versus who's not. It's not the question. We're humans. There's kind of equality in that. All right, that's my talk for this morning.